So today, what are we talking about? First of all, welcome, right? If this is the first Hug event that you're joining with us, if you're not, welcome back. So if we want to get started, if this is your first time joining LGBTQ plus Hug, what we focus on really is a variety of topics. So you may have joined some of the previous ones talking more about diversity and inclusion, or we'd have HubSpot deep dive topics on things like the content hub or the lead object. So we tried to have a bit of a variety in what we address. Now, what we're talking about today is going to be more broader marketing operations and specifically donor journey mapping. Before we get into that, real quick, who am I? If you haven't seen me or met me yet at Digital Reach or Nonprofit Tech Shop, I'm Maarten, mentioned earlier. I'm from Belgium, but I live in Dubai, and I am working on everything marketing operations related at both Digital Reach and the Nonprofit Tech Shop. So mainly with clients, working on setting up exactly what we're going to be talking through today, really. Journeys, what do we need to account for? How do we map out a successful user journey? And more importantly, how do we use that to actually strengthen the user or the donor journeys for our clients? So always working in that bridge between marketing, HubSpot, CRM, web, connecting everything in HubSpot and letting HubSpot do its magic there. Enough about myself. Don't like to see myself on a screen anyway. Why are we chatting about donor journeys today and not perhaps user journeys? Obviously, there's a lot of overlap between the two. The idea is, I guess, twofold, right? On the one hand, we want to just explore different angles to the more typical user journey mappings that perhaps we'd see HubSpot being used for, and kind of explore a different angle of like, hey, how can we use this for donors where the journey is perhaps a little less linear, and how does that journey look like? Which can then also spark ideas for more general for-profit user journey mappings, etc. So it's on the one hand to explore a different angle that perhaps hasn't been explored as much. Plus, it's just an interesting use case in that donors are a very kind of specific target audience, right? And what do I mean by that? Donors for any kind of nonprofit organization, donors are not just giving money, they're exchanging it for something in return. I guess that is very similar to any kind of client, but what exactly they're exchanging this for is very different, right? They're exchanging time, money for a sense of purpose, belonging, impact, showing that they're having an impact, right? And so this is what we want to enforce and show and then kind of deliver to them through their journey, through our internal operations. Unlike any kind of service or good, right, that you buy, the perceived value of a donation can fade over time if it's not enforced enough, right, where people are seeing like, hey, where is your money going, right? What are we actually generating here? So if anything, I feel like it increases the importance of having a strong donor journey, user journey mapped out to make sure that you can have this continuous reinforcement of like, hey, this is what your efforts are going towards and what impact that you're having. And this is where a strong user journey and a good marketing operations setup can really help provide that, right? So today, how we want to go through this, it's really two things. On the one hand, let's go through the overall roadmap strategy of how we go from A to Z, right? How do we start from nothing, set up our initial journey, start building this out, and what does that look like? But then also want to combine this with real use cases, examples. I'm going to be switching back and forth between the slides and HubSpot constantly. So little prayer to the HubSpot gods that everything works the way it should. But that's a risk you take for these kind of ad hoc examples. I do feel like it's useful to see these things in action. We'll focus less so on, I guess, what you would call the tactical guides of like setting up certain types of properties and certain types of triggers and workflows, etc. But we do have a pretty cool guide that we can share at the end that does exactly that. So depending on where you're at with your HubSpot usage and your HubSpot knowledge, that could be useful to really go and dig into, okay, I know what I want to build and I see how it works. How do I get there? How do I cross that bridge? There's some very interesting guides we can share there. But that's a general idea, showing the examples of what we're going to be talking about. today. So let's start it off with, I guess, the theory, you could say, but what does the process look like? And the first thing, really, it's a bit of a cliche, but very important one, is defining, mapping, and visualizing what this journey is going to look like. So we'll go through some tips and tricks on how to go about doing that. But this is by far the most daunting, I think, sort of starting from scratch. How do I go about building this out? What exactly should my journey even look like? What is included in it? And how do I go about visualizing that? I really want to emphasize that. That's something that we work on a lot internally on our side, is making sure we visualize these journeys for a multitude of reasons. One is to easily bring these up in strategic discussions on what your donor journeys should look like and what changes you want to make. Having a strong visual representation obviously really helps with that. But also just to make sure that when you're building this out, you're not missing anything, right? So I think this is really a key concept of, like, let's get a strong visualization of what this user journey should look like, and how can we go about getting this using several AI tools at our disposal. Once we have that small task of visualizing the entire process done, then you go about building this out, designing this journey, designing this experience in HubSpot. This really gets more into the properties and the workflows and the automations that you'll build that represent the journey that you've mapped out. Just creating the different types of automations, properties, views to reflect that. So we'll jump into some examples, just kind of show how this could look. Again, we'll have sort of a tactical guide to go through what these different types of properties and triggers and all that are, but I just want to show it a bit in action so you get an idea of what this could look like for a donor journey. Once we have that, I feel like then the fun part starts. So we have our mapping, we have everything in our CRM design, and everything's collected. We have the properties to capture everything we need. We also want to focus then on, perhaps the most important, actually using that information, using that data. And how can we go about doing that using smart content lists and some of these properties to create tailored outreach, personalized outreach sequences to our donors, right? This is really where it becomes important, of not just collecting it, but actually using the data. It's happens very often that there is so much information and data available that is just not being used. So let's just go through a few practical examples of how you can use that, and perhaps it could spark some ideas for your own organization as well, of how to really go about using this information. We'll then also just briefly touch on, I guess, sort of the bigger picture steps of creating tailored content at scale, right? So once you have a lot of personalized individual outreach content that is ready to be sent out and created, if you want to translate this to more broader at scale content pieces, website pages, blogs, what are some of the cool HubSpot features that you could use to create these easily, right? Without needing a massive content marketing team. And then lastly, really reaping the benefits of a proper designed donor journey in your CRM is having the ability to report in depth, right? To have very detailed reporting of what these journeys are looking like, and to take learnings from that. What campaigns, what are working, what kind of donations am I getting from what kind of folks, and how can this drive my marketing strategy or my outreach strategy or my organization strategy as a whole moving forward. So we'll show some examples of that as well. Should have maybe mentioned in the beginning as well is, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat there. We have Angela in the background moderating. She can highlight questions. We can try to make some time at the end to pick those up. So feel free to just drop things in there, and we can discuss at the end. Okay, so kicking things off with step one, and perhaps again, like I said, the most daunting task: visualizing, mapping, and designing this journey. Now, this can be, like I mentioned, a very daunting step, just because there's usually a lot of ideas flying forward of what should be included in your donor's journey, what makes a strong donor versus perhaps a passive donor. Like, what are these different categories? And trying to put this all into one visualization can be quite tricky. A couple tips, tricks on that, and the way we typically like to approach these things is starting with a very rough summary draft text, right? Collecting all that information. The way I usually split it up is three things: the key donor metrics and data points. So this is where we'll just collect everything when it that has to do with how do donations work in your organization. What are the types of interactions that are happening? What are the different donation types and amounts and campaigns that are out there? Who's collecting them and when and how? Noting this all down, so we have really a full collection of what are the different data points that make a donor, right? And jotting this all into one text-based summary. Putting next to that channels and assets. So again, what do you already have in place? What are you looking to add to it? But what are the different asset or content pieces that donors are going to be interacting with throughout their journey? Emails, landing pages, ads, blogs, call to actions, forms, dropping that all down again into one big summary. And then the last piece, perhaps the most important, but what are some of the steps of the journey flow look like? So what are the automations and categories that are important for you, right? So let's take, for example, if someone makes 3 donations in the last year, we would consider that a tier 1 donor versus 2 donations would be a tier 2 donor, etc. Like jotting that all down. Once we have that, what you can do is go from that summary and just go straight into visualizing, mapping. Great, hey, if you're able to do that, perfect. What I've noticed and really is helpful is first converting that into what you would call sort of building blocks, so like design building blocks. So taking your text-based summary, using any kind of AI model, ChatGPT most typically, to just put this down, convert this into a CSV building block visual designer format that you can then use to upload to any kind of visualization tool like a Lucidchart, like a Miro. And let me show you a quick example of that here. So if you see here, so we use Lucidchart quite a lot in our organization. What you see here, it's a somewhat simplified version of what a donor journey would look like. The different stages that they would go through, the different channels, assets that we'd use for our outreach, and then some of the automations, categories that we'd want to use. So a new contact potential donor comes in, we'd want several stages that this person needs to go through before they actually make a donation. At which point we'd make them an active donor. Then there's some categories in there, like, hey, if they have more than $1,000 in donations, we consider that tier 1 versus less than 100, tier 3. We also want to make a difference between active and passive donors, depending on when their last donation was. All of that information was first in text format provided to ChatGPT in this case. The output was what you see here on the left, kind of my building blocks. So it output a CSV format of what your design should look like. And so I asked it to include shape types. You see even here like fill colors, the connections, right? So this block needs to connect to that block. What I feel is that when you add this extra step of converting your text-based summary to a building block format, is that the actual design you get afterwards is a lot more accurate. Because, and this is kind of the last step in the ordeal here, is you then can connect an AI operator to actually do the building for you. So if you feed it this database of building blocks, you give it access to your Lucidchart, and you say, go ahead, start building it out. I wanted to do this in real time. It takes a little longer, 20, 30 minutes typically, but this design here was largely built by an OpenAI operator completely by itself. I went in and then fine-tuned it a little bit, but there's a lot that it can build in and of itself. And this is a great starting point, again, especially when it's quite daunting in the beginning, to just write things out, convert it to a building block format, feed it to an OpenAI operator, and then get to essentially this, where you can then fine-tune, tweak, and get a nice visual representation of all the things that you need to include in your next step, your actual CRM design, your actual CRM build. So that is an example of what this would look like. Now let's jump right back in. Because then, once we have that, the fun part for some of us, I guess for the more building nerds like myself, the fun part is actually building this out into HubSpot, right? And so this is where we would take our design, take all of the elements that we highlighted of properties that we need, categories that we need, and start building this out. Regular properties, calculated properties, tiers, life cycle stages, building these all out. A lot of these, as most of you know, are default properties in HubSpot, things like their engagement, emails, open, pages visited, but we also create custom properties like donations completed and then average donation amount, for example. And then setting up the automations to push these, to push people into certain tiers based on their donation amount. So same thing, let's just look at a real life example and show what this could look like. I'm going to take here my buddy Roy Murphy. So here's an example of a view of a donor. Now you can see, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. We can see that Roy has already donated in the past. I see he has a total donations of $75. That's just a regular direct property to collect it's a calculated property, a sum of all individual donations added here. We have another calculated property, an average donation amount, which in this case is the same. Roy's only made one donation so far. There's a few other things that I've added to this view, which in this case would be the campaigns to which Roy has donated. I see right now he's donated to the Clean Water campaign. The last campaign that he has donated to, this is not updated because I ran a test right before this, so I need to change it back. And then the life cycle stage. So in this case, Roy is a tier 3 donor. So this is the current status of a donor in our CRM with, as you can see, a bunch of calculated properties that are set based on the last donation that Roy has made. In this case, the donations, we're capturing those as deals. So I can see that donation linked here. On this view, what I've added as well for Roy is, there we go. What we've added as well for Roy is a summary of his donations. So right now, again, he's only made the one. So in a pie chart format, that looks kind of bland. And in a timeline format, I see that his last donation was made back in December. Now, where it gets interesting is if we go ahead and collect a new donation for Roy. So in this case, I'm doing this through a HubSpot form. This can be a variety of ways, right? You could have your on-site forms. You could have canvassers going door to door collecting donation, right? Whatever it may be. In this format, or sort of in this example, I'm just going to take a HubSpot form as an example. Roy, he's donating to the Clean Water campaign, $100, and we'll submit that. So as that's loading, and we'll let HubSpot do its magic, a few other things just to call out is you may notice here as well. One thing we've added in this build is a household object. So Roy is not just by himself. He's in a household together with Kate, and we can have all of these properties like total donation amount, calculated average donation amount, captured on a household level, as well as on an individual level. So that we could, hey, if that is more important for your organization, we could set up our reports on households as opposed to contacts. Going back to Roy, let's give this a refresh. There we go. So we can already see a few things that have updated here. So the total donations have gone up. Roy's now donated a total of $175. His average donation amount is up. The campaigns that he's donated to, it's not expanding now for me. It's probably because I've zoomed in too much. But I see that the last campaign that he donated to is now the Clean Water campaign. And I also see that he's been upgraded to a tier 2 donor because his total donation amount exceeded the threshold amount that we had set up. Everything here below has also been updated. So now I can see his total donations spread across the 2 campaigns that he's donated to, as well as just a timeline view where I can see his last donation here was in June. So this is just to show some of these calculated properties and tiering segmentations in action, and what this could look like in this case for the example of Roy. Now, let me quickly go back here. We only showed some examples, and some things we didn't really show here are where you can go even one step further is having things like target donations, right? So Roy's total amount of $175. How much more would he need to donate to fall into another tier, right? These are, again, things that we could set up to add to the overall donor journey experience. Now, with all of that collected, I'm just going to jump here to the next slide. With all of that collected, now we really get into the next stage of using this information correctly, right? And okay, we've gathered a lot of information on Roy. We know which campaigns he's donated to, how much he donates, when he's donated. Now, how do we go about using this? And this is where HubSpot's personalization capabilities are often underused, right? Where many people will make use of the hi first name, right? But as you can see, we have a lot more data in our system now that we can use to make sure that whenever we're reaching out to Roy, we're not only just talking to him in a way that's relevant for him, but that we're also able to show what these campaigns and these contributions that he's made have led to, right? And so this is where we want to use these calculated properties and just show, like, hey, we know how much you've donated to this campaign, etc. But even more so, we want to look at what he's donated to and start using smart content in our outreach to Roy. Say, like, hey, we know Roy's donated to Clean Water campaign. Let's make sure he knows what the impact is that he's had, or that his donations have had. So again, I'm going to switch back and forth and show an example here. So this would be an example of a newsletter email, right, that we could send out. Now, what you see here already is we have a ton of little smart modules here. So essentially, this whole email is broken down into different elements that are going to appear completely different for everyone who receives them. The way we've set up these modules is with several different variations, really. So you see here our top section of the email, for example, is going to be different based on donor tier. So we want to have a different way of talking to our tier 1 donors versus our tier 3 donors. If you have a quick example of what that looks like, let's see what we go for our tier 3 donors. For our tier 3 donors, what we want to focus on, for example, is how do we get them to tier 2? If that's relevant for your organization. This is an example, right? So our smart copy here is, hey, with an additional donation of calculated property, you'll be updated to tier 2, blah, blah, blah. And these are the benefits that you could get. Tier 1 donors will want to have, perhaps there's a special invite that they could collect. So they would have a separate outreach or a separate piece of content here at the top. But we go even further in that the call to action here is also going to be different. I have a different call to action here for tier 1 to tier 3 donors, where our tier 3 donors that we're trying to get to the next donor tier will want to have a link to additional campaigns that they could potentially support. Versus our tier 1 donors, we could have an opt-in to an event that's upcoming. So again, this is all the same email, but we're just creating tons of variations here. And at the bottom, let's say here at the bottom, we want to focus a bit more on the impact. So sharing the results of, or the impact that the donations of your donors have made. Here, you can see that the smart rules are set up based on donations that the campaigns that they've donated to. In this case, we've added those as active lists. List membership becomes the filter here. And so we'll have a different piece of content here that we'll share based on the campaigns that people have contributed to. So if we look at this in action, let's have a quick look how this would look for our boy, Roy. This is what I mean. I should have prayed harder to the HubSpot gods. You never know when they're going to give you a bit of a delay in loading. There we go. Okay. So this for Roy. Roy now gets as a tier 2 member, you're invited to join our quarterly briefing. So the call to action is also the quarterly briefing that he can RSVP to. And then we know he donated to the Clean Water campaign last. So that's what we're giving an update on here. Again, simple example, but you get the ID. And if you take a look at how this would look for Kate Murphy, for example, the exact same email, looks very different, right? So she's a tier 3 donor, where in this case, we're showing how she can become a tier 2 donor, where the CTA is changed to explore active campaigns so that we can show Kate what other campaigns she can contribute to become a tier 2 donor. And in her case, her last donation was made to the climate justice campaign. So we want to show some impact on that. So again, practical use case, this is how this would look in real life, of like using these segmentations and these calculated properties in a way that your outreach goes further than just personalizing based on name, right? That's the general idea. Let me get out of this one. Okay. So apart from our emails, and so our emails, we know we can personalize based on these segments that we've just set up. But we go even further than that. So not just the way we reach out to Roy, but also if Roy is visiting our website, we'd want that experience to be tailored to his donor history as well. And so this is where in our on our smart pages, we would do the exact same thing, where we go on a landing page and we start adding smart rules for the exact same category. We can get even more granular here, but we can use the exact same filters of, hey, we know Roy's a tier 3 donor, so let's make sure that when he comes on the website, we're showing things relevant to him, to the campaigns that he's supporting, etc. So this is where, again, you make sure that you don't just focus on the outreach, but also just on any kind of assets and content pieces that donors could engage with, and making sure that all of these are tailored. Now, again, the important side note there is that you need to make sure that the data that you've collected is obviously accurate, right? So that's really where you want to go step by step. Make sure you collect everything, your calculator properties are set up, and then you can use them accurately here when you're setting up your outreach, your landing pages, etc. Okay. Cool. Moving away from that, so we know we've visualized our mapping, we've built it in our CRM, we're now using it in our outreach as well as in our existing assets that we have in our landing pages and our website pages. This can often, what this can often lead to is you get now ideas of, all right, what are my donors engaging with, what's working, what's not. You'll get some general marketing insights, right, of where you'd want, or what direction you want to take with your overall content, your broader content, your top funnel content, so to speak, targeting people who you don't have all that information yet on. And this is where you want to then use really more of this, the content creation at scale capabilities in HubSpot, right? This is where the content hub really comes into play, where you can take assets that you know are performing, topics that you can see people are interested in, and rework these into different content pieces that you can use for your broader donor journey. So taking this same example we had last time, and I'm not going to focus on this too much because, to be fair, the content hub in and of itself warrants a deep dive session. There's a lot of features there, but just wanted to touch on this because I do think it's an important piece of planning out the content journey, so to speak, of your donors. So if I have a landing page here, I know this has worked. This is great. We're getting a lot of interactions for this. Remixing this content into other assets that I can use, like an ad, like an email, like a landing page, or another landing page, let's say a text outreach or a social post, right? Using this content remix tool to help take the content that you know that's working to generate these things at scale is a huge benefit, right? Where you don't need a tremendous amount of human resources to generate them, right? Especially if you've set up in HubSpot your brand voice correctly to make sure that these pieces that are coming out are tailored to the way your organization speaks. So just quickly showing this as an example, we've taken this landing page, we've reformatted now into an initial draft for what our ads could look like, ad copies, social posts. There we go. We can edit them from there, use these right away. Again, using this, briefly skimming over this. If you set up your brand voice in more detail, including the tone of voice you want to use, etc., obviously you can get a lot more granular with this. So I just wanted to touch on that because I do think it's an important piece of HubSpot that can be underused, again, especially when there's a lot of content to be generated, and it can get a little overwhelming of how do I generate all this. Use the cheat codes, use the AI remix tools, use the repurposing features that are there to be used. Last but not least, so this is really where I think you reap the benefits of your clean HubSpot setup, your properties that you're collecting, your tiering, your segmentation. The reporting as a result can really be a lot more granular than it would be initially, meaning you can really report on your donor journeys in a way that helps inform your marketing strategy moving forward. What kind of donations are you getting? What is the average amount per campaign, right? Let's show a quick example to talk through some of these. But in that same interface where Roy made his donations, this is what a reporting could look like, and the level of granularity that we can include here. So obviously we can look at our average donation amounts. We have our donation amounts segmented per tier, right, which is calculated based on the individual contributions per donors. We segmented them into tiers, and then we can see which tier is contributing how much to the overall donations we're getting. Total amount of donors segmented per tier. Quarterly donation value, again, in this case, split by campaign. So like which campaigns are gaining traction over certain time periods. These are all interesting insights, especially for a broader marketing strategy to have, or to take into consideration when you're setting up your roadmap. Average amount of donations per person, per household, right? If you recall, we set up this household object as a test. Average donation value per campaign, average number of donations per campaign. You get the idea. This is really where you, like I mentioned, you reap the benefits of your initial setup, making sure you're collecting all these data points that are relevant, and then mix and matching them into reports that really help provide the full picture of not just are people donating, but what kind of donations are coming in from which sources against which campaigns, and how is this evolving over time, and how can I then now use this to change course or change my outreach or my organization's marketing strategy accordingly. So, voila. Cool. Okay. So to summarize this all, and to kind of go back to the initial summary slide I had at the top. Sorry, I'm going to leave this one open here. Starting with the visualization, step one, drafting in text-based format, converting this to a building block CSV file format, feeding that into an AI operator to get your initial visualization. Really step one, can't stress enough how important that is to have that. Once we have our visualization, right, going into HubSpot and starting to do the actual builds, right? So what requirements, translating that into HubSpot properties, HubSpot workflows, HubSpot automations, views, etc. To then go to the next step of actually using this in your outreach. So setting up your first pages, emails, etc., and going further than just into contact information, but really using all of that campaign information, donation information, using that to generate smart lists, which can then be used to generate smart emails, right? Showing updates on campaigns and an impact that donors have made that are relevant to them. And then you kind of reap the benefits of that. And you summarize all that in your reporting, where you can then report on really very granular insights as to which campaigns are leading to which types of donors, and how does the full picture look like. That is in a gist. And again, I mentioned I want to show real examples, the general idea of how we go about setting up our donor journey on our side, and some real life examples. One thing I mentioned is we have a tactical guide which goes a lot more into the actual building out of these workflows and nurture triggers, etc. Sharing this here. I'm hoping you can see this. There we go. So you can go ahead and scan that if you like. This helps with, this is essentially kind of crossing the bridge between we know what we want to build and we know what it looks like. How to actually go about setting this up in HubSpot. Very practical, very click here, go there. Really a how-to guide of how to go about and setting these up. And then lastly, I do want to leave you all with this, is I know we focused today on a bit of a niche segment, right, of nonprofits, donors. In this hub, we try to have a bit of a variety of topics, right? Which is great. We kind of want to look at different angles of how people are using HubSpot. If you're interested in specifically nonprofit use cases and deep dives, there's actually a separate hub also run by us over here at Digital Reach and Nonprofit Tech Shop, specifically called the Nonprofit Hub. So that is all going to be all about nonprofits. Goes even further into use cases specifically for nonprofits, like donor journeys, like canvassing solutions, etc. So feel free to have a look at that. Sign up if that is that's a topic that you're interested to dive into more. And that is it on my end. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to jump back in here so I can see everyone. Shoop. There we go. Cool. So if there are any questions, I know it's aiming at 45 minutes, so I think we are good. If there is any questions in the chat, feel free, drop them.
We have a few in the chat, Maarten.
Oh, let's do it. Okay. Okay. So Kike, yeah, all right, I see them here. So how does the donor journey and data help marketing campaigns? Okay, yeah, so that's a great point, and indeed one that we didn't necessarily cover here, right? But it's the same idea of when we have all these data points, these tiers, these lists that we're creating. One thing that we've shown how to use that here is using that in emails and smart content, smart copy pages, etc. We can do the exact same thing and pushing these lists through to marketing campaigns, meaning more like paid media, Facebook search campaigns, etc. Creating these lists, passing these through as audiences, and essentially doing the same thing where we look at what do we know people are interacting with, what are campaigns that are relevant to them, are they active, passive donors, etc. Creating segmented lists, and then through HubSpot, passing those through to our ad audiences, to our ad platforms, and integrating them directly there. So definitely a good call out, and definitely an important piece of that is if you're using some form of a paid media strategy or using any kind of marketing audiences that you're looking to target, using these lists, segmented lists, and pushing these audiences through is definitely a big part of that. Yeah. In terms of a preferred AI operator, also a good question. I've been using the OpenAI operator. Mixed reviews, like I mentioned, I think it works well if you, in this case, use that intermediary step of creating building blocks, and then it typically does do the job. Does take a little longer. It's also why I didn't show it in real time, 20, 30 minutes. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of back and forth. So I do feel that there might be better ones out there. And if so, please feel free to send them through because I'm open to testing them. But the OpenAI operator works quite well. But again, that intermediary step, which is something that I found really helps, of not just providing a text-based summary, but basically saying like, hey, convert this into a database with building blocks that you can feed into a visual representation platform like a Lucidchart. That's typically the step we use. Remix has to be huge for small nonprofits. Yes, definitely, Dan. So that remix tool, I know we didn't focus on it too much, right? But this content remix feature, it's exactly that. It can really, if used properly, it can replace multiple roles in a marketing team, really, right? Where if you do your initial setup, you have your brand voice, you kind of know how you want to speak to your donors, you have all that set up. HubSpot learns from that. In the meantime, you're seeing what's working, right? Like what content pieces, assets are working, and then you just start remixing, testing these nonstop. We have a few projects where we really see this. It's almost like a well-oiled machine. Content just keeps getting pushed out, and I think you quickly get past the how would you say that, the stage where things are clearly AI, right? I feel like usually when you generate your first blog post, your first landing page, it sounds a little cliche. You can just kind of tell. After several iterations and providing that human input, you really get to a point where you're just pushing out exactly the content the way you would write it, just on a much larger scale. So yeah, definitely agree that's a huge win.
Martin, do you also see Dan's question about small versus large nonprofits? Or would you like me to read
Oh,
it?
here we go. Okay, sorry. How does it differ between smaller nonprofits, maybe a regional nonprofit supporting abuse survivors, versus larger nonprofits? Yeah. Then in what context is this? So you mean like journey mapping as a whole, or was there a specific element that this was in reference to? Donor comms in general. Yeah. No, it's a good point. I guess there's several sort of, obviously what we went through now is kind of applies roughly for everyone, but there's going to be small details that are different. Now, one thing that I think is very different for sort of the smaller versus the larger organizations is how much you want to use the the automated, the generated content versus providing more personal input. So what I mean by that is if you're talking with like a smaller organization, smaller groups of donors as well, right? You don't want to overly rely on fully automated smart content emails. I feel like that's sort of a trap that sometimes people like myself, who are a little bit tech geeky, fall into, where you want to automate and do everything using AI and smart content and smart copy, and kind of finding the balance between, all right, what is useful and actually providing more value to how I'm communicating with donors, versus how much is this kind of taking away that more personal connection that you can have, right, as a smaller organization. So I do think there's a bit of a balance that needs to be struck there. Other than that, I think that it'll be more in the details, right, of the type of data that you're collecting. Things like calculated donation amounts and average donation amounts are a bit more, perhaps more large organization type metrics. For smaller organizations, you perhaps want to focus a bit more on personal interactions, right? When's the last time they replied to an email? When's the last time you had them on the phone, right? These kind of things where, and again, this can vary per organization, but I think that's where, going back to sort of the step one of what are my key metrics, I think that's where that really plays a role. Of those key metrics are going to be very different for large organizations versus smaller organizations. But yeah, it's a great call out indeed that it shows that there's a lot of variety there in how you go about setting that up. Yeah. Cool. Angela, did we cover all of them? I'm quickly scanning through.
Yes, those were all of the questions that I saw. We do have some more time. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or if it's a bit of a longer question, I can also, put you in presenter mode and you can appear on screen and talk to Martin live. So let me know if that is of interest to you. But definitely want to make sure we get to all your questions before we wrap up today.
Yeah. And otherwise, and we'll give that a minute, but otherwise, guys, also feel free to reach out. I know Angela dropped her LinkedIn in the chat. We have a few QR codes here to some of our resources that we shared. Let me quickly put the other one back on screen in case you missed it. I do think this is an interesting one. Feel free to reach out, download this if it's useful. Let us know if there's any follow-up questions. Feel free to reach out. Obviously happy to pick it up from there. Cool.
Yep. Martin, I have dropped my LinkedIn in the chat again, and I just also dropped yours. So feel free to connect with either of us, both of us on LinkedIn. You can message us your questions. We will be getting this recording onto YouTube. So if you want to follow Digital Reach Online Solutions on YouTube, all of our content goes up there. And feel free to reach out to us in any method you choose. We would be happy to support you even after this event.
Sounds good. All right, guys, we'll leave it at that. Thanks all for joining in. Hope it was useful. Hope you took away some perhaps some ideas that could be useful for your own organization or things that you want to discuss. That's really the whole point, right? Is to share experiences and see and try to get ideas from other people. Thanks, everyone.